Members of the hippie convoy put their claim to an Englishman's right to some of the people who claim their rights were threatened.
It's the farmer's land that happens on. It doesn't matter whether he owns it or rents it. It is his land, it's his livelihood. Hello, it's an Englishman's right, and for that matter an Englishwoman's too, to enjoy in peace and privacy the possession of their own property. It's also a right for all of us to go about our lawful occasions without let, hindrance or harassment from authority. In the last 2 years, those rights have collided with each other, and in the process, certain cherished English freedoms have been compromised. It happened when a travellers' convoy headed off to celebrate the summer solstice at Stonehenge. They were prevented by law from enjoying that celebration, and dispersed by means some felt went beyond the limits of what is legally permissible. As for the rights of landowners, fields were squatted on, mass trespass was committed, and damage was done to the farming environment. To look at the issues and perhaps to struggle towards a good old English compromise about those good old English rights, we've brought together members of the established community who feel threatened by the coming of the convoy, and members of the convoy who feel that authority threatens the very survival of their own alternative community. English Heritage, the custodians of Stonehenge, declined our invitation, and the three police forces involved agreed between themselves not to take part. Well, representing some of those rights in conflict, we've Brig Ubridge speaking on his own behalf, but for the rights of the alternative lifestyle, and David Randolph of the Country Landowners Association, whose members also, you might say, enjoy an alternative lifestyle to most of us. Brig Ubridge, first, what rights do you claim, do the travelling people claim as well, and to what extent do you feel they have been infringed?
Well, travelling people, like all other people, like everyone watching this programme, everyone here in the studio, were born on this planet. We have no option but to live on this planet. We can't disappear. When we came into this TV studio, there was a sign saying, "Wet floor, keep off floor." And a friend here from the Country Landowners Association remarked on that sign and said, "What are we supposed to do, walk on the ceiling?" It's the same problem that travelling people face every day of their lives. They've got to be somewhere.
Okay. David Randolph, the Country Landowners Association, what rights do your members feel have been infringed? And do you think it is inevitable that they must be infringed if these people are to have their rights?
No, David, I think that the basic starting point is the fact that trespass is a civil offence, and there is no civil liberty which allows you to invade somebody else's property and do with it as you see fit. And it is the CLA's task to look after the rights of those who own land, and to this end, with the increase in recent years of mass trespass in a number of ways, not just travelling communities, but animal rights activists and people of that sort, that the law should perhaps be amended so that, in the first place, there is an adequate means at the disposal of a landowner to regain possession of his land quickly and relatively inexpensively.
Okay,
at the moment, that's a very expensive exercise.
Do you respect the right of farmers not to have you on their land, or if you want to go onto that land, do you think, well, tough, I want it, I need it more than you do?
No, I respect that the farmers is their land. But then again, I myself believe as an individual that all land ownership is theft, because the land is our birthright. It was given by God.
Well, to you?
To all of us.
Everybody. Yeah.
Each and every one of us. I mean, I'm not going to harm the land in any way. I respect it.
Well, we only have to look at this poster here, yeah, to see where society's coming from, yeah? Now, society even puts its own blockade on its own misgivings, yeah? That's, you know, that's Stonehenge, and between the 19th and the 23rd of June, not even society can enter them stones. Now, they're employing the people who enforce this upon them and enforce it upon us. We don't employ them, you know? They're worried about us driving down the road without tax and insurance, while all the while they've got the criminal element within their own society that likes to go around mugging, robbing, raping. You know, we don't do none of that. This is society for you. Barbed wire.
I know that if I leave my daughter running around the site, she's perfectly safe. Other people are keeping an eye on her, and I can keep an eye on her, and she'll come to no harm, maybe fall over, maybe a dog will chase her, no big thing. If she was living in a house, yeah, and probably if I lived in a city, I'd be in a council flat, God knows how many floors up, I'd have the constant worry of my daughter being abducted. A man, I think it was last week, got 18 months for making pornographic films with a 3-year-old and 6-year-old. And I have no intention to bring my daughter up in a society as sick and disgusting as that. Because she can't go out on the street, she can't play safely anywhere because of all these weirdos and creeps that are around that get their kicks from playing around with little children. And there's no way on this earth that my daughter's going to be brought up like that when I know that she can grow and grow as far as she likes and learn whatever she likes and experience anything safely. And that's why she lives on the road, because she's in a safe society.
Let me ask you, from what you've heard and how you've seen people since, after that whole shock was over, do you have a glimmering of sympathy for these people?
I don't really know. I mean, when they come in and ruined a third of my ground, all I want to do is just live and farm.
The police has got cows on it now.
I'm asking Mr. Atwell if he has come to see your point of view at all. Can we just see if he does? Well, perhaps he doesn't. Let's ask him.
Well, the gentleman behind here now just said there's cows grazing on the field. But if he can prove I put any cows or any animals on that fields, since they've been there, I'll give them the animals. Because nothing's been in there since.
If they say it's a one-off, it won't happen again. They've apologised, they've done as much as they can there. So,
well, first thing I'd say is that it was in fact the second farm they went. They went straight from one farm, John Casey's farm, where they were for a week, straight into another farm. So, I mean, all this talk about only being on one farm is a load of hogwash. I think the more important point, perhaps, is that what you clearly have here is a collision, not between society and no society, but two different perceptions of society. Now, if they want to live their lifestyle and they're prepared to abide by the laws of the land, then fair enough. But when they want to do that by assembling in 200 or 300 groups of 200 or 300 strong with hundreds of vehicles, they present a threat, an obvious physical, intimidating threat to ordinary law-abiding people. And it's the weight of numbers which is the problem. They are deliberately confronting society. It's the opposite of a peace convoy. It's a convoy of confrontation.
Okay, if you find that it takes you several days, and as Mr. Atwell I'm sure will be aware, you either pay an insurance policy or you pay probably hundreds, if not thousands of pounds, then the law, to get rid of people, then the law cannot be right. Because at the moment, and I hope for some time to come, it is no crime to own land. And it seems to me that it's an unacceptable burden for the average person to have to bear, to have to spend large amounts of money to reclaim what is his against people he didn't want being on the land in the first place.
Mrs. Bixley, you
some facts about the illegality of our vehicles.
Had, as it were, the convoy at the bottom of
illegal.
your garden.
Our vehicles are illegal, and they are still being impounded.
Cause for complaint about them?
Yes, I feel that if they choose to travel, that is their affair. They weren't camped on our property, but they decided, or at least not all of them, I'm not going to say that they were all to blame, but a considerable number of them took the attitude that our garden was suitable as a lavatory. And I really don't consider that under anyone's laws and rights that is a correct thing to do.
Well, the basic thing is all our kids are brought up with. I mean, none of them go off to go to the toilet without shovel in one hand, and toilet paper in the other hand. It's basic, you know, it's so basic from the age they're born they're taught all that.
But not in her garden, though.
In her...
There are people who arrive on a weekend
use the flushable
and
toilets.
Suddenly realise they'd like to live with us.
Yeah.
Their children have never dug a hole in the ground. I hadn't until I was 28, do you know what I mean? And it came as a shock to me. And sometimes maybe when people first come on the road, they don't do it. But within 3 days of arriving and living like this permanently, if they didn't do it, we'd all die of dysentery or we'd all be having constantly bad health, and we're not. I'm quite a healthy 30-year-old woman. I wouldn't be if everybody was constantly going to the toilet all around my motor. But we do get new people, like yourself. If you arrived on one of our sites, it would come as a shock to you at dawn to go out and dig a hole. And sometimes people do it in the wrong way, that's all.
Well, I'd like to come to Stephen Sedley about the question of the law here now. Do you feel that there is a need for new legislation, tougher legislation, to cope with the hippie menace?
No, there's all the legislation that's needed to deal in a civilized fashion with the problems that are real. But what has caused the lack of provision is something that hasn't been mentioned yet, and I think is very serious, and that is lawlessness on the part of the government and the state. In 1962, government legislated to allow local authorities to close the commons, which were the traditional stopping grounds for all travellers, gypsies, as they were known at that time. Local authorities did that with great vigour and failed altogether to exercise the power which the next section of the same Act gave them to open sites. So in 1968, Parliament gave them an order that they must open sites, and for 15 years, since 1970, when that Act came into effect, local authorities have persistently broken the law and failed to open the numbers of sites required, or anything near the numbers of sites required.
Moving on from that.
One more thing.
Right, finish.
Ministers have a power of enforcement to force local authorities to open sites. They have failed to exercise those powers. And when you add that inertia on the part of the authorities and government to the inflammatory language used by politicians and chief constables, why can't they live like us, is the lowest level of it, coming from the chief constable, to really deeply offensive remarks showing intolerance worthy of Nazi Germany at senior levels of government, then you start to see the sort of build-up that's occurring and is being turned deliberately into a call for further police powers, more ability to crack down harder on people.
Which would be discriminatory, persecutory?
Well, the use that's made of the powers at the moment is to not to hold the balance between two different lifestyles, but to crack down on one at the behest of the other. And that is discrimination. It means that citizens are not equal before the law. It means that one lot of citizens has the cohorts of the law entirely on their side, and the others have to put up with the consequences.
Well, if I come back in here,
sorry, I want to go to Giles Shaw, who's in our London studio, who's been waiting patiently listening to a lot of this. And I want to ask you first, Mr. Shaw, as a Home Office Minister, can I pick up a point that Stephen Sedley suggested? Is it in the healthiest democratic tradition for the government to make it policy to make life as difficult as possible for a minority, any minority?
It is in the healthiest democratic tradition that all people should be equal before the law, whatever may be their background or their circumstances. And it surely is in no senses undemocratic if a government, through the services which enforce the law, such as the police services, are involved in trying to prevent criminal acts occurring.
Have you met any of these
large numbers
Minister,
of unlicensed vehicles are on the roadway, for example, if you or I have an untaxed vehicle, we've got to deal with it. So is the case for the hippie convoy. And of course, in relation to police action at places like Stonehenge or Stony Cross, they are acting in support of injunctions passed by the High Court in response to individual applications made by those who have the ownership or access to land.
Can you clear up some confusion that we have, and I think maybe a bit of confusion in the Home Office too? After the episodes of June, I heard David Mellor, another Home Office Minister, saying there's no question of criminalising trespass. Then I hear that Mr. Hurd, he of the medieval brigand quote, is saying that he is going to incorporate something like this into the Public Order Bill. And then I hear that the Lords are actually blocking that attempt. Where are you now in trying to get harsher measures, or more restrictive measures, let us say, against people who commit mass trespass?
There is no intention to introduce an amendment to the Public Order Bill to, as it were, to criminalise trespass. What there is, of course, are clauses in the Public Order Bill which could be amended to deal with some of the criminal consequences that have occurred. The difficulty which occurred with Farmer Atwell was, in part, the substantial difficulty in time to get removal of persons who are unwilling to leave his land by, when he asked them, voluntary if you like. Now, what I think is quite likely is that we could design a clause for the public order bill which would make it clear that if there was an incursion of significant size, let us say, if it involved large numbers, if there was damage, and if people had refused to leave, then the police might have the power to, in fact, evict if those persons had already refused to leave.
That's what you're working on,
they were triggering
is
the
it?
offence of refusal.
Is that what you're
rather
working
than
on?
The question of trespass itself. And we're certainly working on a proposal of that kind, as Lord Ganartha made clear in the second reading speech on the House of Lords before Parliament went into recess.
Minister, I'm sure there's a lot of travellers here who want to respond to that. Would you like to listen to their response and perhaps answer them back?
Well, I shall have to be, as you well know, leaving you shortly.
Perhaps we've just got a minute. Who would like to make some sort of response? Yes, you in the back row, you haven't said anything yet.
We were invited onto land at Montesfont, and the council started suing the landowner to move us off, and the police were making threats to the landowner to move us off. Now, we were invited onto that land, and we were camped up there, and they still managed to push us off. The newspaper said that we'd found a loophole in the law, because we weren't actually breaking any law. So they wanted to bring in a new law to make sure we would be breaking it.
Anyone else has a response to the Minister while he's here? Yes.
Yes. I'd like to say that I'd like to hear a bit less of this if we were law-abiding citizens. I think we are. I think it's the councils who are breaking the law by refusing us onto gypsy sites which already exist, transit sites which we should rightfully be allowed on.
Well, I think the first question in relation to local councils and the 1968 Act, which was raised, now clearly it would be up to the hippies, for example, to prove that they were in the same category as gypsies or the traditional showman travellers and others, who have, of course, got a fixed pattern of movement, unlike the hippie convoy, and have, of course, from time immemorial, accepted the rights that they were placed under.
The law, the change in the law, if it goes through in the public order bill, will undoubtedly shift the burden of dealing with the problem if we get them in the future from the landowner to the police, which is correct. It means that Les Atwell won't have to go through the same sort of misery that he did and pay the same sort of money.
It means the police take the choices, though.
But we had plenty of powers this time. I come back to it again. It's the sheer weight of numbers when you've got hundreds of vehicles, hundreds of people, all the laws in the world, you still have to enforce them, and actually enforcing the law is the problem. The police could do it in Hampshire because public opinion by that time had changed. They wouldn't do it in Somerset. They sat back and let the private individual do it.
Rick, you haven't said a lot for some time.
Can I just make an observation at that point, if I may? I think it's terribly important that in fact, the observation which the last speaker made is really fully accepted. It is the shift in public opinion, as much as anything, which has said that after 10 or 15 or 20 years of this kind of movement, then it really reached a scale where it does, in fact, mount a threat to individuals. And at that stage, it's become unacceptable in its present form. And it's for that reason, of course, that actions are now being taken.
Michael Eavis, I mean, you've organised big festivals on a scale as big as anything. I mean, has the problem become unmanageable?
We haven't had any problems all through the years. We've had the travelling convoy with us for maybe 17 years, since 1971. And I mean, there's a few that get a few excited, but there aren't any criminals amongst them any more than there are so with the rest of the people that come to the festival as a whole.
Do you think it causes any distress to the community? Do people worry
people
about
get ever
when the
so worked
festivals-
up about the convoy being on the farm. You know, all the local villagers say, oh, the convoy are there, aren't they? And they get all worked up about it. And basically that's a media thing. I don't think that it's worthy of all the excitement that it's attracted, really, basically.
Why is Stonehenge so important? This whole thing blew up because of protecting Stonehenge and the injunction, and then it grew from there. Why is Stonehenge so important?
Over Stonehenge, we have a conflict, and the conflict there is between people who believe that it's natural forces, the cosmic laws of the universe that make the world go round, and that Stonehenge is a temple where we recognise that fact. And other people who believe that it's money that makes the world go round, and that Stonehenge is a wonderful tourist attraction that we ought to be making millions upon millions of pounds out of.
Tom Woodhouse, you were a custodian of Stonehenge. Was that your attitude towards Stonehenge?
Well, I was there since the inception of the trouble, if it can be called trouble.
Did they cause trouble?
No. The first chaps were known as Wallies. It's true at that time that word Wally didn't have the present-day connotation. But the...
Everybody was called Wally, wasn't
yes,
it?
Yes, it was a sort of collective anonymity. You couldn't come to grips with anybody. They were quite harmless people. They were nice youngsters, in fact. But it's, you see, there's such an amazing proliferation now with different groups claiming some affinity towards Stonehenge. And even then, I don't believe they intend any damage to Stonehenge.
And wasn't any damage done?
No. In fact, I recall occasions when, after the Druids had finished their somewhat grotesque ceremony, which they were never entitled to perform anyway, the travelling public were allowed in. And before they left, they cleared up every cigarette end in the place, including not only their own, but other people's.
So you're for a festival at
And
Stonehenge?
they thanked us. Well, no, I'm not. Well, festival, yes. I've no objection to that, but not nobody's said yet, is that however sincere let's say the instigators of this are, you get a collection of people come down, then you get drugs being sold, and then you get stolen property on the site. It's known, in fact, that there were 2 stolen cars over the years up there, which the police would not go and reclaim, because they were afraid of a confrontation. So whatever's been said about the police now, they've been forced into a position where they are the arbiters of who is allowed to break the law and who isn't.
And that's an unhappy situation for everybody.
Indeed it is.
Can I ask the member of the police authority whether he was happy with the way the police coped with the situation in June and whether he looks forward to the way they're going to cope with it this time?
Well, I don't look upon any time that the police, whether they're the Wiltshire police or the Dorset police or the Somerset police, have to be involved in a confrontation with anybody. There must be a better way of dealing with the problem. But the problem at the moment is that the police are seen to be, if you like, the enemies of the travelling people, because nobody else will take any responsibility. And it always comes down to the police to enforce the law, whether the police want to do so or not.
Do you have to go in a convoy? Do you have to go all together?
Is it so bad?
No, someone, yes, sorry.
Is it so bad that we want to travel with each other, with our family? Is that so bad? What's so wrong?
A single parent with 2 children who can't drive.
Please let us speak, yes.
I'm a single parent who can't drive with 2 small daughters, and I cannot cope, really, unless I've got lots of friends to help me.
Are you prepared? Can I just ask you?
We would like to freely assemble wherever it's convenient, without being harassed, bullied, or fitted up for things we haven't done.
Yeah,
by uniforms of brutality.
But to make sure you can get that, are you prepared to accept a tiny sacrifice, like we won't all go on the same day, or we will? Or
yes, I mean that's quite acceptable. We won't all go. Yes, that's quite acceptable. Yes, as long as we can gather at a point where it's convenient. Yes.
You see, we had sites. You accept these limitations?
We had sites.
Or does it go against the philosophy?
Lots of people didn't sign on in the summer because they were selling their wares, be it food or veg or beads and bangles or what. I mean, there was a fernery of stores, and this was the case. It's only in the last 3 years that the authorities that be, the powers that be, have taken away our sites from us. They've stopped people coming and joining us to gather together, to freely assemble, and denied us in many, many different ways. Now we have nowhere to go, so Joe Public sits at home fearing that, you know, they're going to get an hippie invasion in their back garden.
I take your point, but do you think it's your responsibility as a county council actually to give these people a place?
Not necessarily to give them a place, but I think it is our responsibility to prevent the sort of scenes that we've had every year now for the last few years. To make those will go on year after year. I mean, if anyone thinks that the problem is going to go away, it's not. Not while we've got the conditions we've got in the inner cities, and we have got.
Yes, right.
The hippie people have to come to a decision as to whether they are within the law or without it. They are fast losing the goodwill of the mass of the people in this country, because on the one hand, they see them accepting what they like from established society in the way of social benefits, but on the other hand, they are having a total disregard for established society and the law when they want to go roaming around the countryside.
We're on a site at the moment that is owned by a council, by a parish council. We're quite happy there, but unfortunately, and it was traditionally people's land. Common land was people's land. At the moment we're being taken to court for illegally camping. I put the point to you, we're getting taken to court for living. Not for camping, for living.
Let me go to somebody who has the power to put one of these sites in action. What do you want to say?
Can I just say the corollary to what Douglas Hurd had to say in the Commons, which was mentioned? I wrote immediately and said, what do you mean? What do you mean that the convoy doesn't come within the Caravan Sites Act? And this was at the moment when the press was saying how urgently the government was acting. Now, it took nearly a month for me to get a reply. And when I got a reply, it was from the junior minister at the Environment, Dick Tracy, who said, well, of course the convoy don't come within the Act, but the individuals might do. Well, I mean, tell us something we didn't know. Now, what we want is the government to actually take the matter seriously and come to some arrangement with the local authorities, with the people who are concerned, so that we can arrive at a sensible compromise. If they own land, then perhaps that land is suitable. If it's not suitable, perhaps we can buy that land and provide other land with that money that is more suitable. But surely we can come to some accommodation in a civilised country.
If local authorities are having trouble finding sites for gypsies within the 68 Act, and we, the CLA, urge them to do all they can to do their duty to do so, how in practice are they going to find sites for other people, like our friends over here, who claim to be within that Act? I have some sympathy with the argument that some of them may be within the literal terms of the Act. But in practice, how can the land be found? They say they'll have one site with a standby, fine, but where is it going to come from?
There's an awful lot of land.
When asked whether they'd stay there, they said no, they wouldn't, they'd go where they bloody well wanted to. And that really is the essence of the point.
The Brigadier Bridge, will there be a festival at Stonehenge next year, come what may?
Come what may, there will undoubtedly be people trying to have a festival at Stonehenge. Now, the festival people, the Stonehenge 86 campaign that we've had this year, has talked to everybody, has talked to the English Heritage, the National Trust. We spent months bending over backwards trying to reach some kind of compromise that would allow a site, any site, to be made available. The largest landowner on Salisbury Plain is the Ministry of Defence, as has been pointed out. It was the Minister of Defence himself, Michael Heseltine at the time, who said no way were they going to make available any of those thousands of acres of military land there. So that's why the pressure comes on the local landowners, because there has been given no way out for a solution. I believe that this whole thing has been deliberately engineered by the government, and that in fact what we are seeing is a government that is intent upon finding a scapegoat, any sort of scapegoats within our society that they can pin all the troubles and blames of society on, hound around the country, call them medieval brigands or whatever, and deflect attention from the real problems. Homelessness. There's thousands of people going onto the road because people are being thrown out of houses by poverty. The young people haven't got any houses. We've got the worst house building crisis for years and years and years. We've got these bed and breakfast regulations throwing people out on the road. No wonder there are thousands more people out on the road.
I think you're straying a bit from the point here. I mean, can you wrap it up?
It's all part of the point. There would be a solution if there was the right will for a solution. There is definitely the right will for a solution on the side of the so-called hippies. We've been bending over backwards to try and get that peaceful solution. It's from the other side that the obstructiveness is coming.
Mr. Wilson, I mean, are you resisting their overtures? They're trying to compromise. Is the government saying no?
No, we've heard the party political broadcast. Now let me just tell you the absolute facts. This thing was not engineered by the government. Not engineered by the government. I raised the matter in Parliament because it was of great concern to my constituents, and Stony Cross is bang in the centre of my constituency. I very much hope, both as a result of last June and indeed perhaps of a programme like this, we can move to some consensus which makes it clear that live within the law, abide by the law and the bylaw, no problem. But I think if people choose to do it outside those particular restrictions, then there will be increasing pressure in the future.
Do you see any hope for compromise, for agreement?
There could be agreement if the people who had the money and the land would be willing to say, right, you're not going to go away just because we don't like you. So we've got to find a solution. So we've got to think it out, and we've got to compromise, and we've got to give something, because we can't just have it all our own way. I mean, we can't have it all our own way. We understand that. But they can't have it all their own way either, because we're human beings just like they are. We've got the same right to live on this planet as they have. They've got the piece of paper that says that this bit of land belongs to them. But to me, God says this piece of land belongs to me as well as you. I'll share it with you. I don't think it belongs to me. I think it belongs to everybody. But I'm willing to compromise for the sake of going along with what these people, what their illusion is, that they own this piece of land. If they compromise,